The world of Mundus, and more specifically, the land of Tamriel, has many secret orders, societies, cabals, factions, cults, and sects. Really listing all of them is both a testament to one's patience and one's ability to pronounce words primarily made up of letters in the last part of the alphabet. But one mystical order stands apart and above. An order that commands a school of mysticism that is in many ways still separate from the magic that the garden variety mage has access to, and even to most of the exceptional ones too. An order that has been featured in some capacity in all of the games, from obscure references in lore books to full-on involvement with the story. An order that calls a teleporting, extra-dimensional island its home. I speak, of course, of the Psijic Order. Most of you will have become familiar with them in the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, during their involvement in the Eye of Magnus incident. However, their roots in Tamriel and beyond go back far, far longer than that, as does the scale of the feats they have accomplished. It is these feats and history that we should be taking a look at today. And what better place to start than at the beginning? It is here that I must make two disclaimers. The first is that all information here was gleaned from in-game lore, be it dialogue or books. Despite this, I will be offering my own interpretation of the more nebulous aspects, which may or may not be correct. The second is that I will almost certainly mispronounce many of the names here, and for that, I apologize. Now, let's take a gander. As far as when the Order was founded, it happened sometime after the Aldmer, the progenitors to the elves, settled Somerset, arriving from a supposed mythical lost continent called Aldmeris, though it is heavily contested in the lore. The Aldmer of this time had begun to worship only a select few ancestors, instead of the wider range previously worshipped. One group rebelled against this new school of worship, and left Somerset for, wait for my first massive mispronunciation, the island of Artaeum. They considered themselves keepers of the old ways, the ways the Aldmer previously followed, and still practice them to this day. The exact date when this happened is unknown. However, we do know that the first time they are mentioned was year 20 of the First Era. Keep in mind that Skyrim takes place in the year 200 of the Fourth Era, which is approximately 4,400 years after this event first mentions them, just to give you a rough idea of how old they are. After settling on Artaeum, the Order took up the role as counselors of kings, as kings are known to make really shit decisions at times, so require constant handholding. This duty was called, I'm gonna mispronounce this, Silefrinse, which means grave and faithful counsel. They saw it as a duty, and a very sacred one at that. The book The Old Ways, by Solaris the Lore Master, who himself was the head of the Order for almost 3 centuries, goes into much greater detail. It speaks of the necessity to endow good men with power, and to make powerful men good, not for their own ends, but because of the negative effects despots can have on the world, and on oblivion during both their life and, if they were evil enough, their death as well. They say they have developed patience to deal with despots, via crippling, humiliation, impoverishment, and imprisonment, but never resorting to violence and assassination, as these acts are not faithful to the old ways. To quote directly from the book, in Mundus, conflict and disparity are what bring change, and change is the most sacred of the 11 forces. Change is the force without focus or origin. It is the duty of the discipline Psijic, in Enlightened 1, to dilute change where it brings greed, gluttony, sloth, ignorance, prejudice, cruelty. Here Tyrete lists the rest of the 111 prodigalities, and to encourage change where it brings excellence, beauty, happiness, and enlightenment. As such, the faithful counsel has but one master, his mind. If the man the Psijic counsels acts wickedly, and brings Ognithur, bad change, and will otherwise not be counselled, it is the Psijic's duty to counterbalance the Ognithur by any means necessary, emphasis mine. So in other words, faithfulness to the old ways, the counselled and the Isle of Artaeum is achieved by being an agent of change. The change in question is to be diluted or encouraged depending on the effect it will bring to the world. They are to influence the despot in such a way as to either change them or dilute the unwanted change said individual would have. If, however, the Lord Psijic has allied themselves with won't listen, and begins to ask of the Psijic favours that would be unfaithful to the old ways, they have but three options: obey and fall prey to dark forces, give up and abandon them, shaming themselves and the Isle of Artaeum, never being able to return, or the last, and I expect the most common path taken, is that they must simply kill themselves. After its founding, the Order took to the above actions and duties, counselling rulers and kings, studying in seclusion, and generally guiding the world toward what they perceived was the greater good. The only other noteworthy event was in the 1306th year of the First Era. During this time, the monks of the Order were experimenting with the 11 forces that are theorized to hold the universe together. Some felt it was only 9, and that they could be mapped or manipulated in such a way as to produce more efficient teleportation spells. Either way, the incident occurred at the Aldmer Monastery for Mystic Inquiry, now called the Aldmer Ruins, likely because of this incident, an incident known as the Hyperagonal Collapse incident. Now, hyperagonality is an extension of diagonality into higher dimensional spaces, diagonality being when a line traverses 2 dimensions. Also interesting to note is that the 11 forces which were being experimented on just so happens to be the same number of dimensions that the more popular models of string theory are based around. Anyway, it seems that they were manipulating something that existed or was travelling across higher dimensions, possibly 11, possibly 9. From here, we must look into the book Liminal Bridges, a discussion on the theory and praxis of travelling between Mundus and Oblivion, by Kamalanwi of Alinor. Now, this book is very dense, so I'm going to paraphrase or we will be here all day. A liminal is a boundary or threshold, or something that exists on one. Therefore, a liminal bridge is a bridge that can be used to cross said boundary or threshold. The author states that such transliminal passage beyond boundaries, which are planes, or dimensions in this case, is not possible without a hyperagonal media. This is a media that traverses or exists across various dimensions. So given all of this, what happened? Well, a hyperagonal collapse sounds like a higher dimensional force, or media, collapsing into a lower dimension. The result was that 27 Psijic monks were converted into thin films of glistening liminal particles. So some higher dimensional collapse converted, or more likely crushed, the monks into films of particles that themselves exist on thresholds. Fucking idiots. All was quiet until around the time of the Second Era, and then it all went tits up for the first time, and it was because of the actions of 2 mages that came to study at Artaeum, Vanus Galerian and Manamarco. They were both exceptional students. However, Manamarco, who would go on to become a lich and found the Order of the Black Worm, was a devotee of necromancy, something that Vanus vehemently opposed. He wasn't alone in this, as the Order also opposed necromancy, believing it to be a perversion of the natural order of things. Despite this, they didn't listen to Vanus's warnings about Manamarco. This, along with their rather isolationist nature, led Vanus to leave to found the Mages Guild, as he wanted to spread magic to the people, which wasn't what the super secret order of monks on the magical teleporting island were doing. I know. Shocking, isn't it? The tipping point came when a sea slowed and 3 Daedric princes tried to steal the heart of transparent law by controlling the then Right Master of the Psijics, Achaesis, and yes, I know I've probably pronounced that wrong. This resulted in the Psijic Order taking the entire Isle of Artaeum out of Nirn for a whole 500 years. The exact why of this is known, but we can make an educated guess. Given the spreading of magic and changes in Tamriel in regards to the political climate, they decided that stepping back and letting it develop on its own for a while would be the right choice. The whole "we trained a lich and let him out into the world, and Daedra keep attacking us" probably contributed to the decision somewhat. The Isle of Artaeum returned 500 years later, in the year 730. Achaesis had been killed 150 years prior, when the princes made another attempt at the heart of transparent law, and managed to invade the Isle of Artaeum itself, though they did not ultimately succeed due to the actions of the Soulless One, the hero of Elder Scrolls Online. After it returned, no one would speak of what had happened, and many who had been presumed dead in the half-millennia interval were, in fact, still alive. The rest of the Second Era was quiet, at least for the Order. No other major catastrophes seemed to have befallen them. Time marched on, and Tamriel continued to change. The next big event they were allegedly involved in was in the year 110 in the Third Era. The Marromer, Sea Elves, had launched an invasion from the continent of Pyandonia, led by their then king, Organum. I just want you all to know how much these pronunciations are killing me. This led to the War of the Isle, in which Somerset was almost lost. According to the Wolf Queen, Book 4 and 5, the Psijic Order apparently created a storm that wiped out the fleet of the Pyondonians. If these books are to be taken as truth, the Psijic Order literally rented themselves out for 8 million gold pieces to wipe out an army. Granted, it was in the service of a greater good, but it's still pretty surprising given what we know about them. Their duty of Silifrense, took a bit of a hit after this, with the next 4 emperors, from Uriel VI right through to Uriel VII, refused entry to the ambassadors from the Isle of Artaeum, though I would question how effective telling them no actually is. Nothing of note seems to have happened in the rest of the Third Era, except for an uptick in initiates. The book Pocket Guide to the Empire, 3rd edition, states that from the Second Era 730 to the Third Era 430, only 17 new initiates were brought into the Order. Yet over the following 2 years, 30 more were brought in. Given that this was only a year before the Oblivion Crisis, it's hard to imagine that it didn't influence their decision. Another possibility is that, several years before, the Mages Guild decided to start kicking people out after they commit too many crimes against the guild. It could be this left a surplus of mages, with nowhere to go, and the Psijic Order swooped in and took them in. Another possibility could be that they foresaw the Thalmor taking over Somerset, and wanted to bolster their numbers as much as possible in preparation of a potential conflict. In hindsight, if this was the case, it was a really good idea, as the Thalmor considered them a rogue organisation. 75 years after this, in the 4th Era 100, Artaeum disappeared for a second time, 2 years after the occurrence of the Void Nights, the vanishing of Nirn's 2 moons, an event the Thalmor took credit for resolving. Why they left at this time is completely unknown, but again, it was likely as a result of the change that they perceived was happening in the world, which at the time was the Aldmer Dominion expanding all over the fucking show. The last time we see the Psijic Order get involved in Tamriel is in the 4th Era, year 201, when the Psijics became involved in the Eye of Magnus incident. The Eye of Magnus needs a video all to itself, but suffice to say it was extraordinarily potent magic, and the Thalmor getting their hands on that would have been bad. After the Dragonborn secured the artifact, the Psijic Order teleported it away, presumably to secure it on Artaeum, and to study it. Just, hopefully not how they studied the hyperagonality of higher dimensional spaces, as that just didn't fucking end well. Now, for the most important part, kids. How do we join this ancient magical order? No fucking clue. To quote from The Origin of the Mages Guild, by Archmage Salarth, the Psijic Order served the rulers of the Somerset Isle as counsellors, and chose its members through a complex, ritualized method not understood by outsiders. Apart from the fact that they do take people in, the why and the how of it are unknown. They consist of primarily Aldmer, although they have been known to take people in from other races. Apart from the exceptional magical talent, the only driving force of recruitment seems to be necessity. As we covered before, the last time they recruited huge numbers of students was in response to the expansion of the Thalmor, the Oblivion Crisis, or, decades later, the Void Night, which they may or may not have foreseen. Either way, the changes in their numbers and how they choose who they recruit remains somewhat of a mystery. The magic they wield, referred to as mysticism, is a product of the old ways which they follow, also referred to as the Elder Way. It's a very bold means of worship in Nirn. Now, we don't have time to dive into the mountain of lore on gods, creation, and the monomyth of Nirn, so I shall keep this relatively brief. The Et Ira is a catch-all term for the gods of Nirn, and beyond. A group called the Elenophe were one such group that, after the formation of Mundus, stayed, and decided to cultivate the world. They are considered the progenitors of the Mer people, who eventually became the Aldmer, and others. This point is important. These were the ancestors with whom the old ways said to worship, to honour. But overall society decided to only worship a select few, to hold them up on pedestals, instead of all their ancestors. The keeping of these teachings was core to the Psijic Order's belief system. However, it may also have become a source of their power. Many believe, according to On Artaeum, that the Elder Way or Old Way was taught to them by their ancestors, the Elnofe. It's viewed as, and I quote, a philosophy of meditation and study, said to bind the forces of nature to the individual's will. It differs from magic in origin, but the effects are the same. The actual art that they perform is referred to by the magical community as mysticism, a school that, by the admission of the wider magical community, they don't fully understand. It's claimed that this school operates in such a way as to alter the very fabric of magic itself, in order to allow the user to perform greater feats. It's also been referred to as a school that manipulates magic, not altering it, and other forces to bypass the limitations and structure of the physical world. This sounds more familiar, especially when we think back to the Hyperagonal Collapse incident, in which they were trying to bypass the dimensional limitations of their own plane. The effects of the school are described as the manipulation of and trapping of a soul, telekinesis, the alteration and manipulation of objects at distance, and more. Interesting to note is that by the 4th era, the Mages Guild no longer had a sitting expert, and simply moved all the spells, such as Soul Trap, Dispel, Detect Life, etc., to other schools. I can't help but wonder if this was because they considered them explained, or that they didn't like having to acknowledge any longer that they couldn't explain this school, and so just swept it under the rug. I could go into more detail in another video on actual magic, but for now, that'll do. The actual nature of mysticism itself, not the spell's effects but the underlying fabric, is still a mystery. The actual art itself derives its power from conundrums and paradoxes, and that the user must embrace a temporary sort of insanity in order to effectively practice the art. Any small act of experimentation apparently influences magicka, just by the act of existing alone. As a result, actually deriving order or structure from this to create an enchantment seems to take a good deal longer than ordinary magicka itself, although the benefits and upper limit of power seem far greater, in my opinion. Also, the talk of paradoxes, temporary insanity, and the act of experimentation itself, altering what you're trying to find out more about, reminds me of one thing: quantum mechanics, which, as many of you know, is all I have on the brain these days. Perhaps a side video exploring this similarity is warranted, but for now, that observation will have to be enough. As to its actual source, there are many theories. One is that it draws power from the Aetherius itself, the immortal plane, where all magic is thought to stem from. Although this to me seems like a cop-out answer. Oh, it's magic, so of course it comes from the place that magic comes from. Duh. Another theory is that it flows from Daedric beings of immense power, although how such beings could remain unknown all this time is a mystery. The most interesting theory is the last. It arises from the unused elements of successful and unsuccessful spells alike. I like this one the most, as it lends itself to the chaos and the randomness of the energy that mysticism is so well known for. One thing to note about the art is that, while the patterns can be discerned and related to certain effects, they too apparently change over time, which may mean that spells will need to alter or evolve over time to continue to work. The spells and the fabric which weaves them are themselves dynamic. Knowing all of this, we can now move on to the feats of individuals and the order as a whole, which are indeed impressive in both the effect and the sheer scale involved. As we've already seen, should the Isle of Artaeum come under threat, the order is capable of rendering it either insubstantial or shifting it out of Nirn completely. It begs the question of whether or not they could do so with any landmass, and what happens if you teleport it into a space occupied by matter, outside of that which is easily displaced, like air and water. Seems like a pretty good way to wipe out an entire city. Teleport a fucking mountain into it. They appear to have the ability to scry over long distances, as was seen in Skyrim when they kept the college under watch during the Eye of Magnus incident. They also seem to possess limited knowledge of the future, at least regarding this incident. Considering the times they have taken their island away have always been followed by times of unrest, they may have also had knowledge of other events before they occurred. They are reported to, according to the Doors of Oblivion, possess the ability of telepathy, much like the Dwemer. Their ability to teleport large distances is not inconsiderable either, as they're able to do so with an object even as large as the Eye of Magnus. And, you know, their whole fucking island. One of their most impressive feats has to be their ability to seemingly halt, or at least slow, the passage of time. I believe this is the most impressive feat they are capable of, if it is under the following condition. Non-local. That is, they are freezing time everywhere, or more accurately, allowing themselves and others to move freely without being constrained by its passage. This may also explain their longevity, and why they were fine after more than 500 years' absence. Their second most has to be wiping out an entire army with a storm, and the third is the Hyperagonal Collapse incident, just because it's so damn interesting. Lastly, they experiment with small animals, such as ponies, bears, guars, wolves, sansha, and pigs, to name but a few. These creatures can take on the role of anything from pets to war mounts, and be transcended to an exemplar, a conjuration that becomes the ideal form of whatever creature it has taken the form of. Some are just conjurations, while others are animals they have actually bred. The intelligent Psijic domino pig is the best example of this. It can count to 5, learn its own name, and seems to enjoy it when spells are cast near it. Aww. So there we have it. The Psijic Order, a group founded from those Aldmer who wish to continue their way, the old way, of ancestor worship, and secluded themselves on the Isle of Artaeum. Here they developed their arts of altering the universe, of mysticism, that they either came up with themselves, or were taught by the Elnofe. Either way, it remains the most mysterious of the schools, and also one of the most powerful. They have been involved as counselors to some of the most powerful people in the world, trying to better it through positive change, one of the most important tenements of their old way. Their influence has waxed and waned, as has the extent of their actions, from removing themselves completely from Nirn, to wiping out an armada with a storm. The last we saw of them was when they aided the Dragonborn in containing the Eye of Magnus, and stopping the plot of the Thalmor. What they are doing now is unknown, but given their duty, given their teachings, given their strength and their history, we can assume it's what they have always done: steer change and direct the world for a greater good. Hello everyone, this was the first video on the Elder Scrolls I have done in quite some time. Indications of how you felt about it, either with a like or a comment, are appreciated. Suggestions for other content in the Elder Scrolls universe and beyond are also welcome. Don't forget to enable notifications and hit the bell icon, or else you likely won't find out when I upload a new video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. And until then, goodbye.